So
Okay.
they had an article about the biggest wins and the biggest losses for the Detroit Pistons. So their biggest win was the Pistons re-signing Simone Fontecchio to a 2-year contract. The biggest loss was trading for Tim Hardaway Jr. So what is your stance on their opinion about the biggest win this offseason and the biggest loss?
Uh, I could agree with the biggest win because I think that contract is still doesn't make sense to me considering Simone's like efficiency and his overall production this year. You can look up pretty much any stat on him compared to any other second year player this year, and he was unbelievable. And his fit on the team was great. He pretty much gave you everything you wanted out of like a wing of his caliber. So I really think like I was expecting, and I remember talking about this with some members of the media, even like PR. I remember just being like, I don't know, like where, like, what is Simone's like contract? Like, what's it going to be like? Because it was just like a guessing game, right? Like, it's like, nobody knows these types of things before like they happen. And I remember talking with like other members of the media and being like, where do you think he's going to rank on like the payroll next year? Right. I was like, where he's going to be on the payroll. And I had him probably like three or four on the payroll because I expected him to get a pretty decent payday because typically shooters get paid in the NBA. But not to say he didn't get paid, but I think it's a severe like underpay for his overall production. I think it's like a bet on him being a good fit here and getting a bigger contract afterwards. But I do think that would be a huge win for the Pistons. I remember being absolutely shocked by the number that he was given. Here. But as far as biggest loss, I don't know if I would say Tim Hardaway Jr. is the biggest loss for the team because he still provides them like a very necessary skill that they don't have or didn't have a lot of prior to this offseason, which is shooting. I think if you looked at off seasons before this, Tim Hardaway Jr. would have been the only shooter they went out and got, like, i.e. Alec Burks, you know what I mean? But you now have guys like Simone, you now have guys like Malik Beasley, you now have guys like Tim Hardaway, where you have even Tobias Harris, like you have guys, multiple guys who are known, if not anything else, they can provide shooting and spacing. And I think Tim Hardaway is going to fit that role perfectly, whether he starts, he's on the bench, whatever it is, you know that when he comes in and gives you minutes, you know exactly what you're getting from him. And I think what you're getting from him is reliable. And I think what you're getting from him is also availability, which is something they haven't had, which I know pretty much any beat writer has told you a million times his availability is super important, but it is, like there's no way around it. Like availability is really important. All the guys that they've gotten this summer, knock on wood, they don't get injured, but have been pretty available all throughout their career. And Tim Hardaway is one of those guys where like, yes, he did have a divisive end, I guess, at his time in Dallas, much like Tobias Harris, but that's still a valuable player who was getting valuable minutes on valuable playoff teams. Like, granted, this year he was out of the rotation for like the finals and everything like that, but years past, he was a key player for them in serious playoff runs. So I don't think I would put that as the biggest loss. If I were to put the biggest loss for the Pistons, I would say it's the lack of a backup or veteran point guard. I think not having a veteran point guard right now or a backup point guard, a true backup point guard, is a serious hole on this roster. I think like this is a pretty deep roster, all things considered. Like they have players at each position where I think like if one goes down, they'll be fine. But I think not having a veteran point guard right now is really head scratching to me. And I don't know if it's like a waiting game they're doing or like, what if they're looking at guys that are available still. But I think the lack of having a veteran point guard right now is a pretty glaring hole, especially considering the fact that like we're talking about like guys like Cade, right? Or guys like Jaden Ivey. We're talking about that whole veteran presence thing. Like you have veterans now. Yes, absolutely. But can you name me one veteran point guard Cade or Ivey has played with that like has had a serious legacy in the NBA? Like has someone that like they can model their game after, like, in all due respect to Corey Joseph, Cade, like he's the only guy really that Cade has ever had that like was a veteran point guard that he could look at. But even then, Corey Joseph never was as good as Cade Cunningham is now. Like that's just the objective truth. So I think not going out and even like, because if you want Ivy to be the backup point guard, if that's something they're planning on doing, that's fine. But I think even if it's a guy who's not going to get a lot of minutes, having a veteran point guard on this roster who can provide that type of presence and leadership, I think would do a lot. And I think if you're going to start Ivy as a shooting guard or play him as a shooting guard, then you really need a backup point guard, because I know you can stagger the minutes and you can get, Cade on the court when Ivy's off the court, or Ivy on the court when Cade's off the court. But at some point, you're going to actually need like a point guard to fill those minutes. And I personally, if they're going to utilize Marcus Sasser, I believe he's better off as a secondary playmaker versus a primary playmaker. I think even Summer League, like you could see, like his skill set's not best utilized when he's used as the initiator on offense. He's always going to be at his best when he's just a bucket. So I think backup point guard would be the biggest loss if I were to have one.
I do agree with you there. I thought like the Patrick Beverly news, I wasn't upset by it as like some people were. I was like, okay, that's a veteran. That's someone in the locker room that you probably want in your locker room, but you probably don't want to play him. Like I can guarantee him and Stu would probably just like mess with people like all game. Like it just seems like those two would just be like best friends right off the bat. But I do agree with you. Like the backup point guard position is the $1 million question. I've had conversations is it Ivy? Because I don't think Sasser, to your point, is a backup point guard. And then you kind of get into those conversations where it's just like, okay, who's going to be the shooting guard? Is it going to be Malik Beasley? Is it going to be Ivy? I do agree with you. I don't really think that Tim Hardaway was the biggest loss. I think the reason why Bleacher Report had that was because of Quinton Grimes and losing him, I guess, quote unquote, because he was a young 3-and-D wing that the Pistons traded for. That was part of the Bojan and Alec Burks trade, and they gave up on him in like less than 6 months. I think that was more of like their sense on it and their stance on it, which I don't know if you believe he didn't want to be here because of playing time type of thing. I mean, I read that on the timeline, but I never like got that as like a confirmation. It's just what fans talked about. But I mean, I think Tim is going to be like a 6-man, or you could play him at starting shooting guard if you want. I don't really think that, he's a loss to say, but I mean, I thought overall, like to your point, backup point guard 100%, I think has been the biggest loss so far this offseason.
Yeah. I mean, and on the Quinton Grimes thing really quickly, like not to say he did or didn't want to be here or anything like that, but you can definitely see the enthusiasm he has going to Dallas versus coming here. And not to say anyone can really blame him for such, right? But like, it's pretty evident that like he was pretty excited to go to Dallas. And if you remember, because he's a pretty active Twitter guy, didn't really post much about getting traded here. Not to say he didn't want to be here or anything like that, but I can say you can infer, right? Like you can infer a few things. And I don't know. I just think the fit here with Quinton Grimes on paper was good, but in the short time he was here, it didn't really mesh very well. And you could see that on the court. Like he wasn't really able to find a role, and the role he did play, he was supposed to be like a spot up, 3-point specialist, or like, off the ball creator. Maybe you want him like guarding the other team's best perimeter player. Just didn't really work out. So I think you get someone in Tim Hardaway where you know what you're getting from him versus Quinton Grimes, where it's kind of like a question mark. So I hope Quinton Grimes can find a great role in Dallas, and I think they'll need him pretty badly. But I do think it was a decent trade for both teams. So